Welcome to Ancient World Studies. My name is Dr. Raoul McLaughlin. Several of you asked about other Indian embassies sent to the Roman Empire. One comment suggested diplomatic gifts were trade samples intended to promote and encourage commerce. Let me answer your questions by reading a short extract from my 2014 book, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean. In this book I proposed a new model for the Roman economy, known as the Eastern Commercial Revenue Model. I also considered the evidence for distant political contacts across the ancient world. The first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus, recorded his achievements on his memorial inscription, the Res Gestae Divae Augustae. He said, "To me were sent embassies of kings from India who had never been seen in the camp of any Roman general." Few Mediterranean people travelled to India in the era before Augustus. The hostile Parthian Empire blocked landward travel through Iran, and the sea route from Egypt involved a long and difficult 70-day voyage across the Indian Ocean. Circumstances changed in 30 BC when Octavian, Augustus, made Egypt a Roman province. A vast store of Ptolemaic treasure was released into the Roman economy. This caused the cost of loans to decrease sharply, encouraged greater spending, and increased commercial prices. At the same time, the Roman army restored and safeguarded desert trackways leading to the Red Sea ports, and large-capacity shipyards were constructed to launch new merchant vessels into the Gulf. Strabo records that when the Ptolemies ruled Egypt, fewer than 20 Greek ships would risk sailing beyond the Red Sea. But within 5 years of imperial rule, more than 120 Greek and Roman ships were making the trade voyage to distant India. Strabo explains, "In these early times, not even 20 vessels would dare to sail beyond the Gulf or venture outside the straits. Under the Ptolemaic kings, only a few vessels would sail to India to carry back Indian merchandise." Strabo was an associate of the Roman governor of Egypt, alias Gallus. A few years after the Roman takeover, he accompanied Gallus on an official tour along the Nile River. The group travelled past the Nile city of Koptos, which was the main commercial centre for Greek and Roman traders crossing the eastern desert to reach the Red Sea harbours. At Koptos, Strabo heard a report that over 100 Roman ships were sailing direct from Egypt to India every year. He records, "When Gallus was the prefect of Egypt, I accompanied him along the Nile River as far as Syene and the frontiers of Ethiopia. On this trip I learnt that as many as 120 vessels were sailing from Myos Hormos to India." This was more than 6 times the number that had made the journey during the Ptolemaic era. These ships returned with large quantities of incense, spices, cottons, and gemstones produced in unique eastern climates and geological zones. The great profits derived from this commerce funded further merchant voyages to the distant east. This trade was also important to the state, since Roman revenue collectors imposed a quarter-rate import tax called the Tatarte on incoming eastern products. This greatly enriched Roman revenues and guaranteed government interest and attention. A Roman loan agreement, known as the Musaeus Papyrus, records how imperial authorities collected over 2 million sesterces in tax from a single Indian cargo valued at almost 9 million sesterces. To put this figure in context, 2 million sesterces could pay the annual wages of more than 1,500 Roman soldiers. An ancient Indian study on statescraft called the Zarathustra confirms that Indian kingdoms also imposed a high 1/5 tax rate on foreign trade. This meant that international trade was an important source of income for participating regimes, and this greatly encouraged distant diplomatic initiatives. Eastern regimes had experience of Mediterranean civilization from at least 331 BC, when Alexander the Great had conquered the Persian Empire. Alexander and his successors settled tens of thousands of Greco-Macedonian veterans in Asia as a political and military elite. They also established dozens of Greek-style cities in distant regions to govern these newly conquered territories. Bactria, ancient Afghanistan, was the core of a powerful and prosperous Greek realm until at least the mid-2nd century BC. This Greek kingdom also extended its rule across the mountainous Hindu-Kush and established Indo-Greek regents in the Indus territories. This meant that Eastern civilizations were familiar with the Greek language, culture, commercial methods, and political institutions. They also understood and appreciated Greek currency, weights, and measures. Dio Chrysostom records that during the Roman era, Indian merchants travelled to Alexandria and could be seen attending Greek theatre performances. Addressing a Greek crowd, he states that a few Indians can be seen in the audience of your theatre and sit beside you at each performance. Dio also suggests that in India, certain people could still recite the heroic poetry of Homer, and they translated Greek verse into their own languages. He reports, "It is said that Homer's poetry is sung even in India, where people have translated it into their own language and dialect." Perhaps these accounts came from Greeks who heard and understood Vedic verses. They may have recognized shared themes in Indo-European myths that had common origins. A merchant guidebook called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea records that Roman merchants visiting northern India during the reign of Claudius could still see Indo-Greek coins in the local markets. The text reads, "There are to be found in the market in Baragaza, even today, old drachmas engraved with the inscriptions, in Greek letters, of Apollodotus and Menander, rulers who came after Alexander." The author also mentions the remains of military encampments in India, said to have been erected by Alexander, but these were possibly the traces of much later campaigns conducted by Indo-Greek generals such as Menander, who erected shrines and memorials to mark his campaign limits. The Periplus reports, "In this area there are still preserved to this very day signs of Alexander's expedition, ancient shrines and the foundations of encampments, and huge wells." This Hellenic legacy meant that the Greek-speaking merchants of Roman Egypt who arrived in northern India had an easy means of communication and common points of reference. The established culture had previous exposure to Greek religion and social practices. In the time of Augustus, northwest India was ruled by a dynasty of Saka kings who came from homelands on the Central Asian steppe. The Saka were a nation of mounted warriors who had crossed the Hindu-Kush and invaded the Indus region about a century before Augustus became emperor. They had deposed the existing Indo-Greek regents who governed the Indus territories, but they retained elements of Greek administration, including their distinct coinage styles and written script. Some minor Indo-Greek potentates retained power in the outlying Indus territories until at least the Augustan era. Coins found in the eastern Punjab confirm that a Greek regent named Strato II ruled these domains from 25 BC to 10 BC. His reign was ended by Saka warlords who seized his realm and began minting their own coins inspired by Greek examples. But the Sakas were also subject to foreign threat and aggression. In 30 BC, the Saka realms were endangered by the neighbouring Parthian Empire, which was also a formidable rival of Rome. Commercial wealth and the possibility of attaining a powerful military ally therefore prompted and encouraged Saka diplomatic initiatives towards Rome. The following section is taken from my book, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean. The sources for the information appear as notes to the text. The Roman Emperor Augustus received envoys from the Sakas in 26 BC when he was campaigning in Spain. Suetonius explains that these Indo-Scythian ambassadors were from nations previously known to us only through hearsay, and they petitioned for the friendship of Augustus and the Roman people. Suetonius uses the Latin word amicitia, which signified a political friendship and the acknowledgement of mutual interests and the suggestion of long-term alliance. This was a period when the Sakas ruled most of the Indus region, but were vulnerable to Parthian aggression. The Sakas were probably looking for a military alliance with Rome in the expectation that Augustus was planning to conquer Persia. This would explain why Orosius links the embassy to eastern conquests and claims that the ambassadors came to praise the emperor with the glory of Alexander the Great. The embassy was probably sent by Azes, who was the last Saka king to rule in the Indus region, known to the Greeks as Indo-Scythia. The Sakas were influenced by Greek culture, and Azes issued currency displaying images of the goddess Athena. He also used Greek titles on his coins and referred to himself as the Great King of Kings. King Azes was probably responsible for a second embassy that reached the Roman Empire in 22 BC. On this occasion, the Saka ambassadors sailed to a port on the Persian Gulf and travelled overland to Roman Syria. In Antioch, they were received by Roman authorities and taken to the Greek island of Samos, where Augustus was holding court and receiving African envoys from the kingdom of Meroe. Strabo reports that only 3 of the ambassadors survived the journey from India. The rest had died, chiefly by consequence of their long trek. The ambassadors carried a letter from Azes to the emperor, written in Greek on a vellum scroll. In it, Azes explained that he held the allegiance of 600 minor sovereigns in northern India and was anxious for an alliance with Caesar Augustus. His Indus possessions were about to be conquered by the Parthians, and he proposed a military pact similar to the deal agreed between Alexander and the Indian king Porus. The geographer Strabo had an acquaintance named Nicolaus, who saw the letter from Azes when the ambassadors were being taken to Antioch. He reported that Azes was ready to allow Augustus passage through his country wherever he wished to proceed, and cooperate with him in anything that was honourable. According to Dio Cassius, a treaty of friendship was agreed between the 2 rulers, but by this stage Augustus had begun to seek peace terms with the Parthians, and these superseded his plans for any further eastern conquests. This diplomatic contact occurred in the first decade of Indo-Roman trade, when the sight of Indian visitors was still a novelty for most subjects of the empire. Nicolaus describes how the gifts brought to Caesar Augustus were presented by 8 naked servants, besprinkled with sweet-smelling odours and clad onion loincloths. Roman crowds marvelled at an armless Indian youth sent by Azes, who was proclaimed a living Hermes, because he resembled the pillar statues erected in Greek cities to honour the god of expeditions and commerce. Dio Cassius describes how the boy could use his feet as if they were hands, and with them he could pull a bow, shoot missiles, and put a trumpet to his lips. The traditional symbols of Hermes included the tortoise, the rooster, and a staff which was decorated with 2 intertwined snakes. This is probably why Azes sent Augustus an exotic pheasant, a large tortoise, a brood of colourful Indian snakes, and a giant python. The bird was probably a Himalayan monal pheasant, which displays metallic coloured plumage ranging from blue-greens to purple and copper reds. It was probably symbolic of the mythological phoenix that was said to make its nest from cinnamon twigs. Dio Cassius claims that the envoys also brought tigers, and this was the first time the Romans and probably the Greeks had seen these animals. Augustus displayed these exotic wonders to astonish crowds in Athens and Rome. Strabo reports, "I myself have seen this Hermes, the man born without arms." The Saka ambassadors who visited Augustus were accompanied by a Buddhist or Jain missionary who came from the Gujarat city of Baragaza. This holy man was known in India as a Sharamana, a monk or religious instructor. But the Romans took this title to be his personal name and called him Sarmaras or Sarmanochegas, teacher or master of Sharamanas. Sarmaras probably sought patronage from Augustus and may have requested permission to establish a Buddhist or Jain monastery in Rome, Antioch or Alexandria. His request was denied, but Sarmaras remained in the company of the emperor when he travelled to Athens in 21 BC. In this era, Athens was still a major cultural centre in the eastern Mediterranean that attracted visitors from across the Roman world. It was therefore a place where imperial propaganda could be displayed and propagated. In Athens, Augustus was accepted into a secretive and exclusive Greek cult called the Eleusinian Mysteries, which promised its followers rewards in the afterlife. Augustus used his influence to have Sarmaras initiated into this cult so that he could witness some of the most ancient and enigmatic practices involved in Greek religion. Sarmaras decided to exhibit his Indian faith and asked to be burned alive in a funeral pyre. His request was granted by the emperor, and Cassius Dio indicates the bewilderment of the Greek crowds who gathered for the occasion. He writes, "For some reason, Sarmaras wanted to die," and concludes, "Maybe he wanted to make a display for the benefit of Augustus and the Athenians." Plutarch pointed out that the event resembled a ritual performed for Alexander the Great, when an Indian sage named Calanus renounced his position as advisor to the king and immolated himself on a funeral pyre in front of the assembled Macedonian army. Strabo describes the scene witnessed in Athens by the emperor when Sarmaras anointed his naked body with fragrances and, wearing only a loincloth, leaped upon the lighted pyre with a laugh. Augustus arranged that the cremated remains were placed in a tomb at Athens, and the event commemorated with the text, "Here lies Sarmanochegas, an Indian from Baragaza who immolated himself in accordance with his ancestral customs." When Plutarch wrote his Life of Alexander, he describes the self-immolation of Calanus and mentions how the memorial of Samos had become an attraction in Athens. He reports, "This same ritual was performed by an Indian who came with Caesar Augustus to Athens, and they still show you the Indian's monument." Augustus took great pride in elevating the Roman Empire to a position of world recognition. His memorial testimony is preserved in an inscription that records, "To me were sent embassies of kings from India, who had never been seen in the camp of any Roman general." However, his interest did not go as far as military intervention, and by 10 BC, the Parthians had conquered most of the Indus region, Indo-Scythia. Ousted Saka warlords were pushed further into India, seizing new territories in the eastern Punjab and extinguishing the rule of the last Indo-Greeks. By the 1st century AD, the Sakas had established a new kingdom in Gujarat, with Baragaza becoming the main port for the regime. The Periplus describes trade with this region and confirms that Gujarat was ruled by a Saka king named Nahapana, known to the Roman traders as Manbanos. Perhaps the Amicitia, Treaty of Friendship between the Romans and the Sakas, remained in effect during this period. The author of the Periplus records how Roman merchant ships received the protection of Saka war vessels if they entered the territorial waters of the hostile Satahavana kingdom near the port of Kyllenia. Kyllenia is described as previously being a legally approved emporium, but during the conflict, the Periplus reports, there is great hindrance to trade in this region, and Greek ships that by chance come into these places are brought under guard to Baragaza. Friendly relations were maintained by Roman merchants who conducted regular trade business with the royal courts in this region. They offered expensive silver tableware, specialist slaves, fine wines, and costly clothing for gemstones and other Eastern luxuries. The friendly terms established and confirmed by Augustus therefore safeguarded and enriched Roman subjects operating in distant territories thousands of miles from the imperial frontiers. But Augustus also received embassies from other Indian rulers, including the Tamil kingdoms that governed territories on the southern tip of the subcontinent. These nations probably had little contact with the Greek civilizations who had established dominance over Bactria and the Indus territories. Their first large-scale contact with Mediterranean peoples was probably in the Augustan era, with the arrival of Greek and Roman ships exploring the west coast of India in search of new trade opportunities. The first Tamil state, reached by Roman merchants, would have been the Chera kingdom, which produced abundant harvests of valuable black pepper. A large-scale market for this spice soon developed in the Roman Empire as a popular food flavouring. Roman merchants paid gold for this product and handed Tamil traders large consignments of gold and silver coins. The Periplus suggests that Roman ships sailing to southern India carried mainly a great amount of money, and the discovery of dozens of imperial coin hoards in this region provides support for this statement. The skill of trade is revealed by the Kottayam coin hoard found in a sand dune on the Malabar coast. This was probably a coin consignment from a Roman vessel shipwrecked on this coast. The survivors may have salvaged and stashed the valuable hoard for future retrieval. It was buried in a bronze vessel which contained over 8,000 gold aurei. This influx of foreign wealth explains why the Tamil kings welcomed and accommodated Roman merchants who visited their realms. The Latin author Florus describes that among the envoys received by Augustus were ambassadors who sought friendship, including the Seres. This is probably a reference to the Tamil Chera kingdom, which was pronounced with a soft sh. The seasonal monsoon winds that allowed Roman ships to return to Egypt began in mid-November, and the pepper harvest only became available in January. Consequently, Roman merchants who reached India in late summer might spend up to 4 months in the Tamil kingdoms. This meant that hundreds of Roman subjects resided temporarily in the Tamil ports, including the Chera capital, Muziris. These Roman subjects would have included large numbers of traders, sailors, armed mercenaries, shipwrights, and craftsmen. Evidence of a permanent Roman presence at Muziris comes from the Periplus. The local Tamil diet was mainly rice-based, and the Periplus indicates that the incoming ships supplied the Roman community resident at Muziris with regular grain supplies. Ships were advised to bring sufficient grain for those involved with shipping, because the local merchants do not use it. There is evidence that in addition to the dispatch of envoys, the Cheran kings made exceptional efforts to accommodate Roman subjects and fulfill the terms of foreign friendship. Evidence comes from a schematic Roman map known as Butinger table, which depicts most of the known world. In its final segment, the Putinger map records the presence of a Roman temple in the Indian city with the label Templum Augusti, an Augustan temple. Similar buildings existed in the Parthian Empire, where wealthy Roman merchants established Augustan temples in the Persian cities connected with their commercial interests. The imperial cult was strong in Alexandria, and the Jewish philosopher Philo describes the city's Augustan temple as a large building positioned opposite the harbour. He claimed that it was superior to other imperial temples built in rival cities, and was full of offerings, pictures, statues, and decorations in silver and gold. It was said to be a hope and beacon of safety for all who set sail or come into harbour at Alexandria. The Augustan temple at Musaras probably formed a similar function for Alexandrian merchants making the voyage to India. Perhaps this temple was still in existence 3 centuries later during the reign of the Emperor Constantine. Constantine was the first emperor to convert to Christianity, and his new faith may have influenced his dealings with Indian envoys. Eusebius refers to imperial icons displayed in India that recognized Roman divinity, and these may have been objects associated with the imperial cult. He records that Indian ambassadors arrived from the distant east with presents including many varieties of brilliant precious stones and animal species unknown to us. They presented these offerings to the emperor, confirming that his authority extended to the Indian Ocean. The rulers of their country rendered homage to him with paintings and statues that proclaimed his paramount imperial authority. Eusebius could be describing a formalized approach to the emperors that follow practices first established by Augustus. However, in the case of Constantine, these symbolic displays honoring the imperial cult had to be redevised with a Christian emphasis. During the imperial era, Tamil kings possibly protected Roman ships from hostile forces on the frontiers of their territory. The Periplus lists a series of islands north of Chera territory and warns that around these places there are pirates. Confirmation of this fact comes from the Putinger table, which displays the words pirate in bold red letters near that part of southern India. South of Chera territory was the Pandian kingdom, which controlled pearl fisheries on the southern tip of India. The Pandian fisheries produced thousands of pearls every year, which represented millions in foreign currency. But pearls were also highly valued in India, so the Pandian kingdom derived enormous revenues from its fisheries. An ancient Hindu text, called the Garunda Paranam, suggests that half a tola, 5.8 grams, of the finest pearls could be worth 1,305 silver-based coins. Beneath this grade, there were more than 10 further categories of lower quality pearls that were nonetheless valued at substantial coin totals. The ancient Indian guide to statescraft, the Arithastra, recommended that rulers stocked their treasuries with bullion, jewels, and strings of pearls. Indrachandra, the longest, Indrachandra, were threaded with 1,008 pearls, and there were 5 further categories of pearl strings used in treasury accounts, with the smallest containing only 10 pearls. Early Pandian kings were keen to foster contacts with the Roman Empire, and they sought friendship with the emperors. Augustus received a Pandian embassy in 20 BC, which was sent to display Tamil wealth to the Roman court and encourage trade contacts. They presented the emperor with pearls, possibly strung as Indrachandra, precious stones, and a giant Indian elephant. Suetonius records that Augustus subsequently offered 50 million sesterces worth of pearls and gemstones to one of the most important religious buildings in Rome, the Temple of Jupiter Optimus on the Capitoline Hill. Perhaps this was the Pandian gift which Augustus dedicated to the leading god of the Roman pantheon. As a comparison, a figure 50 million sesterces is more than the revenues that Rome received annually from Gaul or Judea, and was enough to pay the annual cost of 4 Roman legions. In verses addressed to the emperor, Horace mentions an extraordinary white elephant displayed in Rome during this period. He claimed that public readings by poets could not compare with the sight of this animal, which amazed and excited the crowds. Perhaps this was a gift from an Indian king, as rare white elephants are sacred in Buddhist and Hindu faiths, where they symbolize auspicious achievements, earthly power, justice, peace, and prosperity. The Romans were astonished to learn that the Tamil ambassadors had completed their entire journey by land. It had taken them 4 years to cross India and Iran, but during their journey they received the assistance of many intervening regimes who had also hoped to profit from the growth of world commerce. Flores describes the Pandian ambassadors as Indians who live immediately beneath the sun, the tropics. He writes that they regarded their 4-year journey as the greatest tribute they could render. Their dark complexion proved that they came from beneath another sky. Their trade initiative fueled the fashion for imported pearls and encouraged Roman ships to sail as far as the distant Pandian kingdom. These early diplomatic contacts between distant regimes ushered in a new era of prosperity and progress, with the dissemination of greater resources and ideas across an interconnected ancient world. This has been an extract from my book, The Roman Empire and the Indian Ocean, published in 2014. For further information on my books and the Eastern Commercial Revenue Model, follow the links below. Thank you for your time.